Hi, this is Cole Silver, and welcome to another edition of the Rain Dancing Expert Audio Series. How would you like to have really, really good clients? You know, the ones that never ask you to compete on price, the ones that really make you feel like you're a partner and they're a partner and you're just not looked at like another legal vendor? Well, today's guest has the answer to help us get there. Bob Potter, Managing Principal of R.A. Potter Advisors, a marketing strategy practice firm for professional service providers. Bob has spent 25 years in business development, working for companies such as IBM, McGraw-Hill, Dean Winter, and MBNIA. He has opened new markets in the United States, Mexico, Australia, and Asia, and he is the author of Winning in the Invisible Market, a guide to selling professional services in turbulent times. Welcome, Bob. Thanks for being here today.
Cole, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Geez, that title of your book is so apropos. It looks like as we head into 2008, we may just start to see some turbulent times.
Well, you know, it's interesting. When I wrote that book, I was writing it in 2002 and 2003. So we had just gone through some of the terrorist issues as well as war and stock collapse and scandal. And so the times were pretty turbulent. Interestingly, it came out. Things looked brighter. And suddenly, as I'm writing my next book called Third Level Selling, it looks like we're going turbulent again.
Yeah, it's sort of a secular thing, isn't it?
It sure is. Although I think for most individual professional service providers, generally business is always turbulent.
What is the invisible market?
The invisible market, let me stand back and tell you this. When someone buys legal services, they're actually making two decisions. One is they're deciding, one, I need the protection of legal services that one or a number of attorneys can supply. And then the second decision they're making is which attorney should I use? Now, frequently they're occurring at the same time, so you usually don't think of them as separate, but both of them have to occur. I'm not going to choose an attorney unless, choose among attorneys unless I have a legal problem. The visible market is what I refer to as visible because clients are actively looking for an attorney. They're raising their hand, say, I have a problem, I'm looking for an attorney. Frequently, it's characterized by request for proposal or qualifications or price quote, or it's just someone you know saying, hey, I need help with something. That's the visible market. The invisible market is where the client is doing a number of things, one of which is deciding whether or not they need legal services. So the invisible market includes everyone who, one, isn't going to use your services, two, already has retained someone, or three, is in an earlier stage of their decision to use your services. The reason I wrote this book as I did is because when you look at the visible market, one of the things that's apparent is the people who win in the visible market are usually the preferred providers going in. In other words, RFPs are designed to be level playing field, but what we discover is that the winner is almost always the preferred provider going in. And the reason they're winning is because they did something before it became visible. They actually won the business or created the business in the invisible market. They engaged the client earlier in their decision process, so when it came time to choosing the service provider, the people who engage them first are usually going to win. So the invisible market is where they decide I need legal services. The visible market is where they decide which service provider to choose. And if you engage them early, you're usually going to be that winner.
You know, Bob, a lot of lawyers will tell me, well, I don't need to market right now because people don't need legal services all the time. And I'll say to them, well, people don't need a new car all the time either, but that doesn't stop car dealers and manufacturers from soliciting you. So is that generally what you're talking about, meaning that you have to always be in front of the prospect so that when the time arises that they need a lawyer, you'll be at the forefront of their mind?
Well, let's think of it in reverse. If your first contact with a client is when they've already decided they need legal services and they're simply choosing an attorney, pretty good chance you've already lost unless they don't have any other choice. Now, in the legal world, frequently clients either don't know who else does this, or they don't want to go to the trouble of finding out. So if you're the only service provider in their line of sight, you can win by waiting. On the other hand, for most of us, there are alternatives. Once the client has alternatives, then if you're just engaging them when they're sending out, for example, an RFP, if it's some corporate work, you probably are going to lose that. It's going to be tough for you to catch up. If you're the only one who does what you do, great. You might be able to compete that way. Generally speaking, we want to be the ones who help the client identify the problem, recognize that there's a solution, and if you do that, there's a good chance that there won't be a competitor. The client will just choose you. So there's the trade-off.
So is the rub here, or the moral of the story, identify the problem and propose a solution even before they become a client?
Yes, well, I think that's ideally that's the case. Let me back up a little bit, Cole. Most attorneys, as well as most service providers, frankly, feel that their value is in their capabilities. You know, I worked here for 7 years before I became a partner, and I've been a partner for X period of time. I really know this stuff. Now, if you think about it, though, your value isn't in your capabilities. And I'll give you an example. Let's say today, for whatever reason, you're riding on a bus, train, airplane, and you sit next to a person who's coming into your city to receive an award for being the world's greatest brain surgeon. How valuable is that to you? The answer, hopefully, is it's not valuable at all. What makes it valuable is if you need brain surgery. If you don't need brain surgery, there's no value. There's no transaction that's going to occur here. Might be very interesting, but here's a person with eminent capabilities that has zero value for the people who don't have the problem. So what I like to tell attorneys is, instead of viewing your value as your expertise, view your value in the context of the critical and urgent problems you solve for your clients. Once you identify what problems you solve, now you go look for the people most likely to have those problems. When you engage them and you ask them if they have the problems, the answer is yes or no. If the answer is no, even if you believe they should have the problem, you have no value till they do. On the other hand, if they do have the problems you solve, now you can help escort that client through the decision process and end up being the service provider of choice. And that's how really you want to work it if you can.
You know, you're talking about your second book, I believe, was about third-level selling.
Right.
And in some of the materials there, you talk about differentiate on the client.
Right.
A lot of marketers out there, Bob, they talk about, you know, how to differentiate yourself. You talk about how to differentiate on the client. Can you describe the differences here?
You know, Cole, I can, with a little story, if I may. I live in Northern California, and we've lived here for a number of years. And when we moved here, my 18-year-old, was 2, and my 13-year-old didn't even exist. So we designed the backyard to be a very kid-friendly place, little swing set, little concrete area to ride their three-wheeler. Well, at any rate, now the boys are older, the backyard doesn't really fit, we've got this stuff. Well, at any rate, I decided I wanted to do a lot of things back there and redesign the backyard, put a pool in, put a grill in, music, all that great stuff. My neighbor said, well, Bob, you probably don't want to do that by yourself because you may actually lower the value of the property if you don't do it well. I said, well, I certainly don't want to do that. What should I do? Well, you should use a landscape architect. Well, I didn't know any, so I got some referrals. I got 3 referrals. And the way they approached my business is really a great example of what third-level selling is, and I'll take you through it. The first landscape architect shows up, and we walk into the dining room, and he shows me his brochure. Beautiful brochure, clearly worked in the best areas, great ideas, really highly qualified. So this is a person with great expertise. And I said, well, how much is all this going to cost? And when he told me, I was a bit shocked and almost stopped the whole process. At any rate, the next day, the second landscape architect came by, and he, too, had a brochure. We looked at the brochure, great pictures, good ideas, worked in some of the best areas. So now what do I have? Well, I've got two highly qualified people, so I have at least a market. Maybe I can get them to compete against one another. Maybe one is hungrier. They can fit me into their calendar, get me some discounts on services. At any rate, I have a little leverage, and I think I'll do even better if I get a third landscape architect in. So the next day, the third landscape architect comes by, and I'm walking to the breakfast room table, and he says, Mr. Potter, do you mind if we walk around the backyard? Not at all. As we're walking out, he's asking me some somewhat personal questions. How long have we been here? Where did we live before? How old are the kids, boys, girls? What sports do they play? How do my wife and I like to entertain? Did we know this person who used to live in the area? And we did, so we had that in common. Then as we're walking around the backyard, he's saying that, you know, this area over here is a drainage easement, so you're going to have to move the pool over here, and will there be little children? And there might be, so that says let's put a top on it. We've got this big willow tree, and he goes, you know, that's a beautiful willow tree, but do you know what it's going to do to your pool when it drops its leaves and its roots dig in? And we walked around the backyard, and he asked us how our neighbors felt about music. At any rate, who do you think we chose, Cole?
Obviously the third.
All right. Now, the interesting thing here is the third provider never showed me a brochure. He did essentially what I'm talking about in third-level selling. Instead of forcing me to see the increasingly nuanced difference between himself and two other very highly qualified service providers, frankly, I wouldn't see that much difference. They all look pretty much the same. Once you narrow the list down to the capable service providers, 99% of what they're going to do seems similar to what the other guy is going to do. So at that point, instead of forcing me to see the difference in him, differentiate on him, he did the reverse. He found out what was unique about me, personally, professionally, my situation, the project, the circumstances in my backyard. And by doing so, he created a great deal of differentiation, which created a great deal of preference to work with him. So what I tell people is that the first level is your pitch. That's your statement of capabilities. That's your offer to the market. That goes on your website and your collateral material. It's what gets you invited. It's your ante to play. Beyond that, though, as soon as the client narrows that to a short list of very capable providers, you pretty much look the same. So you need to be able to answer the question, why should the client choose you? And there you need to accelerate your message by identifying what's different about you, why it's important, and to offer some sort of evidence or proof that you're actually better. And that's level 2. That's positioning. But level 3, and both level 1 and 2 are asking the client to know more about you, right? They work from the vendor-centric assumption that the more the client knows about me, the more likely they are to choose me. But that's really only true to a point. What the elite providers do is they get to this third level, which I call partnering, by differentiating on the client. And I break it down into 5 areas. Getting the client, accelerating personal relationships, accelerating professional relationship, understanding more about the project and situation, the client preference, and the decision process. If you can find and align to all that and then present back to the client what you've learned about them, you're much more likely to be chosen. And by the way, Cole, you're much more likely to engage a client in a way that creates a more satisfied client. A highly satisfied client is much more likely to use you for follow-on business and recommend you in the market, which is why the elite attorneys out there no longer do have to do any business development because their clients do it for them. Sorry for the long answer there, Cole, but I hope that answered it.
So how'd the pool come out?
As a matter of fact, when I do my presentations, I actually have pictures of the pool being built, and it looks great back there. And being from the Midwest initially, I'm in it actually more than the kids are, so I'm thrilled with it.
You know, when we spoke on the telephone when we first met, you were able to start a conversation through a series of questions that eventually connected us, and you knew things about me that very few people had asked me in a lot of my business dealings. I was amazed. Can you walk us through the 4 questions or whatever it is that the number of questions that you ask to win at the personal aspect of this selling and client differentiation model?
You bet I can, Cole. And this is an area I actually had to learn and continue to learn when my research showed me that people with a relationship are 2 to 3 times more likely to win the business than people without a relationship. So that told me that people were making decisions based much more on personal considerations and emotional considerations than they were on the logical side. So it prompted me to go back and look at what elite providers do to win business, and I discovered that they were able to do what I call accelerate personal relationships. The best way to accelerate a personal relationship is to find common ground. Now, most people believe in a business environment that you don't get personal too soon because it's inappropriate. Well, I found it's just the opposite. If you get personal quickly, it enables the rest of the discussion and makes everything go faster and better. So what I tell my students in my workshop is what I want you to do is find common ground. And I want to demonstrate to you that you can do it usually in only 3 or 4 questions that seem, 1, appropriate to a business environment, 2, take only 30 seconds to ask, and 3, almost always elicit common ground. Now, before I give them to you, Cole, let me explain something. Most of your audience will have heard of 6 degrees of separation, the idea that we're never more than 6 people away from knowing anybody on the planet. Well, if you think about it, if you're working in a certain geographic area, in a certain industry, at a certain income and education level, the likelihood that you are going to have something in common with someone is darn close to 100%. And if you can find that in the first 30 seconds to 1 minute of meeting them, you're really going to accelerate the relationship. Now, so, a lot of people will say to me, gee, Bob, when I go in, I just look at pictures on the wall or trophies on the desk and try to use that as a conversation piece in order to build rapport. Well, that's fine, but it seems kind of manipulative, awkward, and everybody probably does it. But I'm talking about actually making a connection with someone. Now, my questions, and everyone should develop his or her own, but I found if I ask the following 4 questions, I'm almost always going to have something where I can make a connection. My questions are, how long have you been here? What did you do before? Did you grow up and do your schooling here? And do you live in the area? 9 times out of 10, Cole, one of those is going to lead to a conversation. And the analogy I draw is, I think most of your participants and listeners are going to be familiar with the old game Battleship, where you're facing across from your opponent who can't see your screen where you've located your battleships, and they've located theirs on the other side, and you keep sticking pegs in till the opponent says hit. Now, once they say hit, then you put all your pegs right around that to, quote, sink the battleship. Well, the analogy is similar here. Almost always with one of those 4 questions, there's going to be something that I can say, oh, I went to school there, or I lived in that area, or I worked there, and do you know this person? And almost always you're going to find it. Now, it may be that one of those conversations will lead to a 20-minute conversation. In fact, I once had a sales call on a CEO where the entire hour we were together, we were talking about raising teenager. I considered it a perfect sales call because when clients choose a service provider, the biggest driver of choice is who do I know, like, and trust. Now, we're assuming some basic capabilities here, but that is nothing else comes close as far as a determinant of who that client's going to choose. So those are my questions, Cole, but I always tell my participants, you develop and work on and practice your questions until they become second nature to you. And typically, Cole, what will happen is after the first session with the group, I'll send them out to work on this relationship acceleration, and they come back typically with what I call the amazing story. Bob, as it turned out, I've been working with this person for 2 years, and we actually went to the same grade school together from 1st to 3rd grade. Whatever it is, I call it an amazing story because at first it seems like a small world, isn't that funny that it happened? After you get good at it, the amazing story becomes routine, and you're engaging and re-engaging clients based on that common ground continuously. And since it's the biggest influencer of choice, and oh, by the way, the biggest influencer of success, period, it could be the single most important concept in third-level selling.
Could you just repeat those questions one more time?
My questions are, how long have you been here? What did you do before? The first two are kind of business-related a little bit, gets me started. Now, then I can raise my eyebrow and say, now, did you grow up and do your schooling here? One of the reasons I ask it that way is because I discovered there are certain questions that can blow up in your face, such as, where did you go to college? Oh, you didn't. Sorry, I asked. Are you married? Oh, bitter divorce? Oh, sorry, I asked. Do you have children? Oh, you've been trying for how long? Sorry, I asked. So these, to me, are non-controversial questions that are appropriate in almost any business situation. So as I said, the third one is, did you grow up and do your schooling here? I love to get some school stuff, particularly college stuff, because if I don't know specifically about their school, I might know about their basketball or football team, whatever it is. That's almost a great one. And finally, if I'm in a geographic area, where do you live? I live in the Bay Area. I know something about almost every town around here and schools there and people who live there. So those four almost always give me something to follow up on until I can double back and say, in effect, hey, we have this in common. Now, what happens after that is that enables the whole next part of our discussion, because now I want to do some professional relationship acceleration. Then I want to find out what the project's about. I want to know more about that than anybody else, what their preferences are and what their decision process are. But all of that is enabled with the relationship acceleration skills that we teach. Those are my questions, Cole. If someone has better ones, I'd love to hear about them.
Well, when you talked about getting personal quickly, my first reaction was that lawyers don't like to get personal, but listening to these questions, they're really not that personal.
Yeah, you're not getting controversial. You're not asking about religion, politics, or anything very controversial. And I find people love it. Now, if you think about it, if you could get those questions out in 30 seconds. Now, you probably won't stay there because one of those questions is going to lead to a whole series of conversation. But that conversation is what enables the rest of the conversation. So, yeah, it shouldn't be controversial. And it shouldn't be, and people will resist it, going, Bob, you know what, it took me a long time to get this appointment. I don't want to blow it by, offending this person, getting personal. And I said, look, if it's the single most important reason why you would be chosen, why would you leave it to chance? This should be a systematic, proactive thing you do with every client all the time. And, oh, by the way, don't leave it there. Every time you engage with that client and going forward, and re-engage on that personal platform. And you have to be careful of that. If you forgot what you asked last time, now you could offend. What I like to do is when I'm talking to clients on the phone, I've got my Outlook out in front of me with my notes, and anything personal I put right up on top, so that I can say, last time we talked, your daughter was playing in that select soccer final. How did that turn out? Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. Something like that. But you have to be careful now. Once you get personal, you've got to own it.
So how do you make the leap? You've decided that you both like Michigan State. You both were in the same fraternity in different colleges. Now it's time to talk business. How do you get to understand their unique situation and their preferences? Do you just continue on with these sort of probing questions?
No, I like to migrate using what I call a give-and-take question, Cole. A give-and-take question is sharing some information about my client's company, competition, industry, and then converting it to a take question, starting off strategically, and then migrating to the area I want to focus on, which is, does this client have the problems I solve? So, for example, if I'm an intellectual property attorney, I might migrate and say, there's been an awful lot of lawsuits and issues related to intellectual property. What changes are you seeing in your industry? My objective there is to naturally migrate. But, a conversation is a transaction, Cole, and people want to know that they're getting as much as they're giving. So if all you're doing is quizzing and you haven't earned the right, I may be reluctant to share as the client. On the other hand, if one, we've got something in common, and two, you've shared something about my industry or about something going on, and then ask the question, I'm open now to talking about that a little bit more. Now, I do something else, Cole, which I say, if your value is in the problems you solve, when and if the client raises a problem, I have a questioning technique that I find extremely powerful. I explore that problem for what I call SID, cause, impact, and what they're doing about it. So if you say, yeah, as a matter of fact, we've got some things, some intellectual property that we're putting out there, and we're worried that people are taking it, then I'm going to explore it for SID. Cole, what's causing that? How is that impacting you? And what are you doing or what are you thinking about? I ask those three questions because they tell me three very important things before I propose anything or recommend anything. By asking about cause, it tells me whether or not I can help. By asking about impact, it tells me whether or not it's a priority or just another problem that they're probably not going to address. By asking about what they've done or doing or considering, it shows me where the resistance in the decision is. It tells me that, one, they've tried something before, it didn't work, or two, that they're already talking to another intellectual property attorney, or three, that they don't have the authority to make a decision. Those are all things I want to find out before I just shoot the shotgun in the air and hope the duck flies over. So what I like to do is opening the question at a strategic level, then migrate into the problems I solve. But any time the client brings up a problem, I want to go deep on that problem by going cause, impact, undoing, considering.
Does it make sense to go back to your office and then propose solutions or benefits of using your firm rather than doing it at initial or second meeting?
Absolutely not.
You got to strike while the iron's hot.
When you're in front of a client, you are at your highest value. You're shining a light on something that's an issue. And while you're there, that light is burning brightest. As soon as you leave that client's office, the real world takes over again and swallows up your issue into the mass of other issues your client is facing. What you want to do at the end of every call, and let me just characterize it this way. If a call that you're having with a client is 1 hour long, you save the last 10 minutes for what I call a momentum recommendation. Until that time, you want to find out as much as you possibly can about this client personally, professionally, the project, their preferences. You want the client to be doing all the talking. The last 10 minutes, though, you want to make what I call a momentum recommendation. A momentum recommendation has three characteristics. One, it's aligned with where they are currently, and it advances the decision. So two is advances decision to the next level. Three, and this is the most important part, Cole, you ask the client to do something now. The client has to make a commitment to do something or they're really not qualified. Now, that might be another appointment. It might be to introduce you to the people you need to deal with. It might be to get the documents you need to review in order to do your work. But the client should have to do something. If they're not willing to do something, it answers a big question in your mind, which is this client qualified? Are they really going to do something? Now, most service providers have had the following experience, Cole. They've gone and they were very excited because this client really does have the problems they solve, so they're so excited about that. They say, hey, Cole, why don't I go write something up for you? And the client goes, sure, go ahead. Because the client isn't committed. They don't have to do anything. You're writing something up, says, hey, I got nothing to lose. It's a good way to end the meeting. I don't offend anybody. The problem is that when you send in your write-up, the client suddenly isn't responsive. You put a call in, no answer. You wait a few days, you write an email, no answer. The problem is that the client isn't committed. What you want to do is gain commitment from that client to do something that's an appropriate next step. Frequently, that's another meeting. You want to at least have that, but as I say, it could be anything where the client has to do something. You're not the only one doing it. So that's my advice on Don't leave there. While you're there, set the anchor to the next meeting or next event while you're there, because you're not as important once you leave.
Bob, I think we've hit a point where lawyers are going to drop the ball most of the time. They don't like asking for business. They inherently either feel it's begging or don't want to be rejected. They don't know how to close or, as you say, get the client to do something. So I need to walk through these three elements just a little bit more with you. Let's say we take your example of the intellectual property lawyer speaking to a business owner who is trying to protect his trade secrets, okay?
Yep.
So the first bullet point or the first element, you describe the current situation. Mr. Smith, I understand you're trying to protect your trade secrets, and this is a very important thing in today's marketplace. Something like that?
Well, yeah, but Carl, I guess I'm going to need to give you just a little bit more information to make it somewhat complicated. I said that your value is in the problems you solve, right?
Right.
Problems actually go through 5 steps before they go into execution. Those steps are, 1, problem recognition. If a client doesn't recognize they have a problem, even if you think they have one, if they don't recognize that you have no value, go on to the next client because they don't get it. 2, problem assessment. Now, if clients have 100 problems, right? They have 1,000 problems. They're only going to deal with a couple that are critical and urgent right now, and the ones they're going to deal with are the ones that they've assessed that, wow, this is really hurting us. Now, once they've decided that they're going to do something, a problem matures into an objective. They go, okay, I want to do something about it. So the next stage is they look for their universe of alternative solutions. So they're expanding their options at that point. At stage 4, they're reducing their options. Which of these options is best for me? And stage 5 is execution, and you pick a service provider. Let me give you a silly example, Cole. Let's say I'm feeling overweight and winded and my clothes are tight and so forth. They go, man, this I don't feel quite right here. And then I go to a doctor, stage 2, and the doctor says, oh, my goodness, you're 25 pounds overweight and your cholesterol's through the roof. I go, oh, gee, I want to do something about that. So I set an objective. I no longer just say I'm overweight. Now I say I'm 25 pounds overweight. Now I have an objective. I want to lose 25 pounds. What are my alternatives? Well, I could get an operation. I could take drugs. I could eat less. I could exercise more. That's now stage 4. I'm going to go, which one's the best for me? Well, I'm not going to take drugs or get an operation for 25 pounds. I can eat a little less, but I love to eat, so I really need to exercise more. I've always wanted to do that anyway. So exercise is really what I'm going to do. Which gym should I join? That's seeing problems in their 5 stages. Now, in your intellectual property case, first of all, does this client have a problem? Yeah, I've been worried about that. Frankly, we haven't done much about it, but I think some of our competitors are starting to use some of our stuff. All right, well, what's the impact of that? What assessment have you done? If I haven't done an assessment, maybe one of the things that you recommend is say, well, perhaps what we should look at is do a little survey out there and see who's doing what or what you're losing. If they've already assessed it and say, yeah, we really want to protect ourselves, now you want to explore what alternatives they've considered. So you can actually read where they are in the decision, Cole, or anticipate what they would have to do next. Because most times clients aren't going to just say, oh, sure, Cole, I'm going to sign up with you today. They're going to say, well, I need to talk with thus and such, and we need to do this before we, actually take this action. Whatever that is, whatever the next action is it an assessment? Is it a survey for solution? Is it evaluation of the solution? Is it evaluation of various attorneys or service providers? Find out where they are, what they would need to do next to advance the decision, and what they would have to do to make that happen, and that's your recommendation. Does that make sense?
I think so. And about the commitment?
Well, see, I'm glad you brought that up. In my first book and now my second book, I never use the term closing. I hate that term. Closing is what people used to do when they were selling vacuum cleaners and typewriters. When you sell a service, you're selling something that doesn't exist when you sell it. It's a commitment to do something in the future. And if the client doesn't trust that it's going to happen, you lose value. In addition, the client has to be actively involved, usually, for you to provide your service. So in effect, your client is the co-manufacturer of the outcome. Anything that you do that reduces trust reduces your value. And if you're using old sales techniques that talk about closing or, making that leap and forcing a client manipulatively to make a decision before they're ready, you're asking for trouble. But think about what I'm asking here. Does it sound like closing? I don't think so. What you've done is you found out this client has a problem. You've investigated that problem for cause, impact, and what they're doing about it. So it's been assessed. There is a desire on the part of the client to get it taken care of, and there's a natural next step. All you're doing is asking for commitment to take the next step. So it shouldn't be some big manipulative leap. It should be this client wants to do it. In fact, if you don't ask, the client will stand back and wonder why. So for me, it's not closing. It's making an appropriate recommendation, but you are asking for commitment, because if the client isn't committed to take the next action, then you really don't have an opportunity here. So it shouldn't feel like a big leap into the darkness asking for a close. It should be a very natural recommendation. In fact, if you do it well, the client may say, hey, what should we do next? I really want to solve this problem.
Bob, you help out not only a lot of lawyers but also a lot of financial service companies. I can't imagine a harder sell than the commodity of money. So let me ask you this. Why or how do clients choose one law firm provider over another?
All right. Well, it's a good question, and you're right. When you're selling money, your money's just as green as another. It should actually be quite a bit easier for an attorney if they do it right. There are 5 reasons why clients choose one service provider over another, and the last of those 5 reasons is price. The first, as we've already mentioned, the number one reason why I choose a provider over another is relationship. The client is essentially asking, who do I already know, like, and trust? Now, if you have a doubt about that, just ask your audience to think about the last service provider they hired, their own attorney or a financial advisor or a tax accountant. Did they do an RFP? I don't think so. They probably are working with someone they already knew, liked, and trusted. Now, for me, I work with my tax accountant was my college roommate. The guy who invests my money, I played baseball with. If you ask me if there are providers out there who could do a better job, I'm saying it's entirely possible. Are there providers out there who could do it for less money? Probably so. Is there anyone out there that I would consider changing to? The answer is absolutely not. So relationship is the single biggest driver. Now, we're assuming here, Cole, that people have fundamental basic capabilities. I'm not going to use someone who's incompetent because they're a friend. But once I've established that one's a CPA and the other is a legitimate money manager, now I'm saying I'm basing most of my decision on who I know, like, and trust. The reverse side of that is card number 2. Who understands me, my business, my situation, this project, my preferences, and my decision process better? That's the single most underplayed card in the deck. Clients want to work with people who understand them and their business, because in effect, when you hire a service provider, you're turning the keys of your career over to that person, and the more they know your business, your situation, and so forth, the more you feel you can put your burden onto them. Now, the next one, number 3, is who ranks the highest. Who has done more of this specific activity than anyone else? And when I say rank, it's a client perception of who's done more. So if it's intellectual property and entertainment, who can clearly demonstrate that they've done more of this than anyone else? In the absence of any other differentiator, that's a big driver, because most business people are looking to avoid making a mistake, not optimize. The best way to avoid a mistake is pick the market leader, the dominator, and that protects you from mistakes, because if the market leader does something wrong, it's their fault, not yours. On the other hand, if you take a little risk and go down the list on rank, you're taking on personal risk for doing that. So the market leader will always get a hall pass to the short list. Next, it's just the firm that has some capability that's different or better. Number 5 is price. If the client believes that there is no difference in attorneys up the hierarchy, they'll choose on price. But law, actually, you've got a bigger advantage, because clients are frequently more worried up the hierarchy, so price should be the last consideration, even for basic activities such as wills or easy contracts. You should be able, as an attorney, to compete away from price up the hierarchy, and if you can't, it's a self-inflicted wound. If you're competing on price, it's simply because you couldn't get the client to value the things up the hierarchy.
Wow. I'm going to have to go through all these lists again. You gave so much valuable content. How can people get a hold of you and your services?
Well, it's pretty easy. rapotter.com. On that website, I kind of go through some of the services, have some articles there. You can even click through to Amazon to buy my first book, Winning in the Invisible Market, or my contact information is there. I work with lots of clients on their business development techniques, on their message, so that they can build a value proposition. I work with them on strategy, on winning RFPs, and all of those good things, Cole. So that would be the first way to get hold of me, is just go to rapotter.com.
Great. Well, Bob, thank you so much for being here today. As I said before, incredibly valuable content.
Well, it's fun. I really enjoy doing it. People kind of accuse me or say, Bob, you should get a life. You think too much about this stuff. But for me, it's a lot of fun. Thanks again, Bob. Thank you, Cole.
This has been another edition of the Rain Dancing Expert audio series, brought to you by Cole Silver of FindCareerSuccess.com. Until next time.